20 years. So in the old vehicle, you would have extreme leg, chest and head injuries. You'd be trapped in the car. But find out what the NCAP rating is for the vehicle that you're driving or your son or daughter is driving and get the safest car that you can afford.
And that last point you make, James, is really important. So often when parents...
Safer vehicle choices save lives. Find out who survives.
Shows that we ain't gonna stand shit. Shows that we are united. Shows that we ain't gonna take.
Thank you. Yeah, it's some powerful stuff, and I think when you see what we've got to offer you today, more of that. More powerful stuff that I think resonates with everybody when they see it. So thank you very much for joining us here today. I think from our perspective as the Automobile Association, along with our partners GlobalNCAP, the FI Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies, we are absolutely delighted to have all of you here today, not only from the manufacturers and from the people involved in road safety in South Africa, but obviously from the media as well, who are going to be spreading, hopefully, our message about safer cars in Africa, not only South Africa, but in Africa. I want to welcome on stage Mr. Collins Khumalo, the CEO of the Automobile Association, who will give us some background and set the scene for us, and Mr. Alejandro Fioras, who flew in this morning from London. He doesn't look like he flew in this morning from London. He looks quite fresh, actually, who will present the results of the test that we conducted on 4 vehicles. We conducted the tests, was it September? September. Yeah, it was September. We conducted the test in September, but obviously Alejandro will tell you a little bit more about that. Thank you very, very much for being here. We really appreciate your attendance. And with that, I've got nothing of importance to say. It's these two guys, so I'll hand over to Collins.
Many vehicle manufacturers normally call us to find out if their vehicles are being tested. Obviously, with a little bit of worry in their voices to find out, what does it mean and what are the implications. And our normal response is that wait for the process. Time will come for us to be able to inform you. If your car is being tested by us, you will be notified by your global office in terms of where are we in terms of that process of that vehicle that is being tested, so that when we then are in a position to announce the results, like in today's session, most of the manufacturers and most of the people that are here, some of them don't know whether their vehicles have been tested or not. And I think it's just that element of being able to make sure that the process is independent. If you are worried that your vehicle is being tested, I think maybe that's the wrong question you should be asking. I think the question that one should be asking should be a question that says, sorry, can I just go back? Should be a question that says, why am I so happy to sell my car if I'm going to be worried if it's being tested or not? It is good to see representatives of the media, the industry, government, our customers, to come and witness this event with us. This is the second in a series which we believe that is making a significant contribution in terms of where we see road safety, but safety of passengers in the vehicles that we sell out there on an ongoing basis. I'd like to welcome special thanks to Alejandro, who's the Technical Director for GlobalNCAP, and NCAP stands for New Car Assessment Program, which is an initiative that has been going on for quite some time and with a clear intention to improve the standards of the vehicles that are being sold out there in the market. But let's come back home to South Africa and to Africa as a continent. This chapter of GlobalNCAP is about Africa. It's about South Africa as a country, but also the Africa as a continent. The next consumer and the most biggest consumer market after India and China is Africa, with a population of up to 1.1 billion people, with the fastest growing middle class in the whole world, which means that the element of motorization on the continent is going to be forever be increasing on this continent. And therefore, the quality of the vehicles that we send out there is quite critical. But maybe let's just get closer to home in terms of the statistics around vehicle crashes. I've just given you some stats that Africa is the third largest, biggest market. But let me just bring you back a little bit. Africa is the least motorized vehicle with the lowest per capita vehicle population in the whole world. But we occupy the last bottom 29 positions on this graph in terms of the vehicle people that are dying in accidents on an annual basis. Of the 178 countries that were tested, that 29 bottom are all in Africa. Let's come closer to home, which is South Africa or Southern Africa. That's where the biggest challenge is in terms of the number of road deaths. And this is just but one of those challenges that are facing us, and which is why we, together with the Bloomberg Philanthropies as well as the Bloomberg Foundation and the FIA Foundation, felt that this is something that we needed to focus and pay attention on. There has been about 14,000 deaths on average on South African roads per year for the last 10 years, which means about 140,000 people have died on our roads as a result of crashes and accidents. This figure highlights the need for safer drivers, for safe road infrastructure, and safer vehicles. That combination of those three elements is quite fundamental, and today's presentation focuses largely on the vehicles themselves. We as the Automobile Association feel very strongly that the consumer has a right to know. When you go and buy a vehicle tomorrow, you need to know what safety level your vehicle has, so that when you buy it with the confidence that that vehicle will, at least at the most or at the worst of times in an accident, will protect your life. Our initial results of our program that we launched last year were very well received by both the public as well as the media. And in fact, we followed it up at the AA with an assessment and a research on our members and external members to find out what would they want to see. And 75% of new car buyers indicated that they would be influenced by whether a vehicle has got a rating in terms of its safety or not. If that rating is not there, then they would be able to make that decision not to purchase a particular vehicle. So 81% then of the population says we would make our decision on that stamp, on that vehicle that indicates whether this vehicle is safe or not. So who needs to step up? Who can actually make the difference? I'm putting in some of what I believe are the key players in this whole thing. You've got government, who's significantly spending a lot of time and resources trying to solve a lot of other problems. And some of the key issues, obviously, you've got transport, you've got health, and you've got policy issues. So all the role players that are out there, the original equipment manufacturers, most of whom are present here in this room, have also got other challenges that they need to solve. Then the motoring public. So those three key stakeholders that have an impact on what happens on the road. The manufacturer needs to make sure that the vehicle is in good condition and it is of such standard that it will be able to protect the people that are inside those vehicles. The public in terms of the decisions and how they drive on the road, because that's only but one of those things. And then the government, not only in terms of policy, but also in terms of the infrastructure. I mean, the government is the largest owner of infrastructure and roads. So if you then decide, I'm going to build a road, the road needs to make sure that it is safe for one to be able to drive in those roads and make sure that it doesn't cause or contribute to the problems that we're facing. Other than the issues, and if you look on the slides, and maybe if I can just take some time, just in terms of priorities, this is where road safety sits in terms of government's priorities that you have. There's other bigger priorities that the government has. And whilst we're looking towards them to change certain things in the structure, one also has to understand, and I think the people that live in South Africa would understand the massive challenges that our country and our government has been facing, other than other self-made problems that are out there. What is the context for the consumer? Over the last, about give or take 10 years, we've had a crash, a global meltdown in the economic sector, and that has had an impact in terms of your exchange rate. Now, all the manufacturers that bring their vehicles into the country are based outside of the continent or originate, not are based. They are based here, but they originate from outside of the continent. So if there is a depreciation in the currency, both in South Africa and the rest of the continent, and I mean, South Africa has had a massive meltdown in terms of its exchange rate. The impact and the implication of that is that the affordability of vehicles becomes problematic, and I'll give you an example. With the depreciation in the currency, the cost of an entry-level motor vehicle has more than doubled over the last 10 years, but the salaries haven't doubled over the last 10 years, which means that people keep their vehicles a little bit longer, which means that then that vehicle has to be able to, throughout its life, ensure that the quality as well as the safety of that vehicle continues to be maintained. The motor industry has also faced its own challenges. With the crash in 2008, a lot of manufacturers are struggling to keep their motor dealerships open so that they're able to sell more vehicles and sell more cars, which means there's more pressure on them as well. So when one makes recommendations, needs to look at those contexts and say, what then becomes the net impact to the consumer, taking into consideration all of those factors. Now let's get to the real issue that we came here for today. Of the entry-level vehicles that have come into the market, only 25%, and that is not in terms of the number of vehicles in the market, but in terms of the volumes of vehicles that are being sold out there. Only 25% have no airbags. 38% have only one airbag. 74% do not have an electronic stability control, or ESC, which is proven as a very critical crash avoidance technology that is out there. I've put in the pressure from a manufacturer's perspective, because they need to make sure that they keep the prices at the level that is affordable to them, so that they can be able to trade profitably in the market. But all of these factors obviously contribute in terms of certain decisions that are being made. South Africa alone has had a death toll, or its death toll just over the December holidays that you're going to right now, has more people dying in accidents than the whole of the number of people that die in accidents in the UK in the whole of last year. I just want to let it sink. 14 to 15,000 people that have died on our roads last year in South Africa, just over the Christmas season, accounts for the death toll in road accidents in the UK and in Australia. Is it because South Africans have accepted this as normal? Because nobody seems to be shocked by these statistics. Or we get shocked for a day and then we just recover and then life continues. Or maybe because you don't feel the need to change the statistics and say, what are we going to do about this and make sure that we make a difference? So I've dealt with the OEMs. I've dealt with the other side. Now let's come to me and you. When you drive your vehicle. This is a graph that indicates where people always feel that they are always right. The person that's wrong is the person next to them. The problem is not me, it's you. And that's what you also say, is the problem is not you, it's me. Which then creates a different problem on the road, because what it does is, it says, so the government says it's not my problem, I've got other priorities. The OEM says, no, it's not my problem, I've got other priorities. You saying, no, it's not my problem, it's the other driver's problem. So whose problem is it? I go back to this slide. Who needs to step up? Even though the road, the crashes on the road, 852,000 of them in South African roads, by the way, just to remind you, costs this South African economy about 152 billion rands a year. No one says it's my problem. Everyone else is looking to the next person next to him and say, I think the problem lies there. So what now? Can we continue to accept the status quo? We believe that as the AA, something needs to be done. And that is why we've partnered with the GlobalNCAP and the funding from the Bloomberg Philanthropies, as well as the FIA Foundation for the Safer Cars for Africa program. Since we started this program, we believe that we don't want to see things remain normal. We want to move the normal. And when we started the needle last year, we believe that we're moving the needle and we're moving the normal to a new normal. There are more people that are aware of the risks of driving unsafe cars. There are more people that are saying I want to make a conscious decision. I don't want someone else to make that decision for me. I want to make that decision for myself to choose what vehicle that I can be able to buy. People are watching, people are listening, and people want safer cars. They want to know how safe a car is before they can make a decision. And that's why the NCAP program is very critical for us, not only in South Africa, but in all emerging markets of the world. And this program started out of the continent and has found its way through to this continent. And again, thanks to the Bloomberg Philanthropies for sponsoring and helping us make sure that this program gets off the ground so that we can be able to send that message. Can we take it at a personal level? What level of safety is good enough for your employees? What level of safety is good enough for your customers? What level of safety is good enough for your family? What level of safety is good enough for you? From the AA, I now would like to hand over to Mr. Alejandro to now give us the real results. I just wanted to share that moment with you so that I create the context, and the context that enables you to be able to see what we are about to see and be able to come out here a different person. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Collins certainly sketched a picture. Before Alejandro speaks, I'd just like to say two things. First of all, some really stark statistics that emerged from Collins's presentation, and some very interesting ones about what customers in South Africa want. So if you are from the media or if you are from an OEM, I think those statistics are certainly something that you need to take heed of. About Alejandro, I don't think there's anybody in the world who's as passionate about this as Alejandro, and nobody who's as knowledgeable about this as well. So Alejandro is going to give his presentation. I want you to make notes as you go along, because if there are any questions that you want to ask about crash testing and about this process, we're very honored to have him in South Africa today to answer those. So don't let him go without having your questions asked. So with that, I'll like to hand over to Alejandro.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Collins. Thank you, Leighton, as well. Philip, thank you very much. I just want to have a brief comment to clarify what Leighton said. I'm passionate, but there are people actually that were much more passionate that started all this 20-something years ago, back in the US, Europe as well. So I think our generation is more inspired by them, and we're trying to keep the legacy running. I will, in this presentation, I will try to give an overview of what we do and what was the criteria that we used to rate the cars, in the same way we have done it in the last presentation, in the last results. And at the same time, we're going to share the results and share as well some comments and some suggestions. Okay, what's the criteria we use? When we say a car is safe or we rate it by star rating, the main criteria we use, it's more than 80% of the whole result, is the injuries. So a car that has certain amount of airbags doesn't mean that it's going to be a 5-star. We have to test it, and we have to show that that car is actually able to prevent injuries, and it's also capable of keeping that person as much, or the full integrity, or as high integrity as possible after the crash test. Criteria we use is injuries in different body regions. We use the same biomechanical criteria that is used by regulations. So it's not rocket science. We're using the same biomechanical criteria and the same tools. We cannot have human beings every time we crash test a car, obviously, so we use crash test dummies. Crash test dummies, the ones you have in the picture, are very extremely efficient tools to assess what happens or what would happen to a human being inside the car. Those dummies are, at point 1, they share a lot of similarities with a human being in terms of weight, dimensions, dynamics, the way they move, and also the anatomy. If you see the structure of the dummy inside the one that cut in half without the skin, you will notice a lot of similarities with a human being. That's the stage 1. Once we have this dummy performing as similar as possible to a real human being, then we put sensors inside the body regions, the critical body regions, head, neck, chest, knees, hips. And with all these sensors together, we can more or less understand with a very high fidelity what would happen to a human being that is involved in a car crash of the ones we are testing. So these dummies are representing human beings in a very realistic way. These dummies are the same ones, are called hybrid 3 dummies, 50th percentile, and they are the same dummies used in other crash testing that you have probably have seen before in the videos. The same dummies used also for regulations. So there's no, once again, same tools that we are using as regulations to assess the vehicle safety. Those dummies are not a cheap tool. Those dummies are more or less a little bit more than 300,000 euros each, and they can be used for many years. What's the kind of crash test we assess, or the crash conditions we assess? We basically have 4 passengers in the cars that we are testing. We have 1 driver, 1 passenger, both adults, and we have 2 child dummies in the rear, 1 representing a 3-year-old, 1 representing an 18-month-old. We crash test the car at the 40% width of the front of the vehicle on the driver's side at 64 kilometers an hour. It's not a high speed, as you can recall from what actually are normal roads, but it's a little bit higher than the speed used in regulation. It's only 8 kilometers an hour faster than the regulation speed, which is 56 kilometers an hour. Both child dummies in the rear they need to be, they of course have to use a child seat. Children must always ride a car in a child seat. And in our tests, when we decide to test a car, then we ask the manufacturer to recommend us which is the most or the best child seat they recommend for those child passengers in the rear, and how to install that child seat. And the other important thing is that every time we recommend this to the manufacturers before the test, the only precondition we give them in the case of South Africa is that the child seats that they are choosing must be available in the market. Because, of course, you have very good child seats in other markets, but the child seats that they are recommending for South Africa are the ones that you can find here as a consumer. What are the 5-star requirements that we have set for South Africa or for Africa? It's very simple. Frontal crash test with at least 14 points. So they have to score at least 14 points over 16. We need to perform a side impact assessment and pass the regulation requirements, the United Nations Regulation 85, side impact at 50 kilometers an hour. So there is a cart hitting the car at 50 kilometers an hour. And the other two conditions we are requesting, it's the car has ABS 4-channel standards, and also that the car has 2 seatbelt reminders in the front seats. With these requirements, the car can be granted a 5-star for adult occupant protection at this stage of the program. How do we inform results? Basically, in a spreadsheet like the one I'm showing in the screen, on the top, the brand and the model. The star ratings, we have 2 sets of star ratings, one for the adults, one for the child occupants. We show pictures and videos of the cars we have tested, and we also share the color dummies. I'm going to explain all this in detail. The star ratings, 1 set for the adults, 1 set for the child occupants. Maximum is 5 stars. The lowest one is 0 stars. As you can see there were always also scores, which has a correlation between the scoring and the star rating, which is explicitly explained in the protocols of GlobalNCAP, which are published and public. And in these 2 cases, the reason why we're using 2-star ratings is to inform in more detail, in better definition, better detail to the consumers. How is the performance of the car in terms of protecting the adult and the child occupants? And there is another highlight into this, is that the child occupants, they're using a device which is a child seat. It's external to the car. And the adults are just the adults with the restraint systems in the car. That's the reason why we decided to give both star ratings separately to give more accurate information. We also show color dummies in the spreadsheet. The color dummies are just detailed information about the adult protection, or how the different body regions of the adults were protected during the crash. We use a very simple color coding and copying basically, or taking it over from Euro NCAP and the other NCAPs in the world. So we use the color coding that you see on the screen. Good is when you have almost a full integrity of that body region after the crash. That's the significance of a green body region. Red body region, poor, it's when that body region is critically damaged. If we put it in a less technical way, when we have a car that has a head, neck, or chest in color red, that means that there's a high probability of these occupants to suffer life-threatening injuries. That will lead, according to the protocol, to a 0 or maximum 1-star result right away. The main highlights for Africa is that we are testing the most safety basic equipped version available in the market. The protocol that we are using is the same as India and Latin NCAP 2013, but it's the same protocol as India. So if you take the Indian program, you can compare the ones we published this year, you can compare them directly to the African results. And in this case, we have selected 4 popular models. It's also important to mention that every time we test a car, once we buy the car, we do it anonymously. So no one knows the purpose of that car, the destination. I mean, they don't know what's going to be let's say the story of that car after we buy it. So no one knows what's the purpose of the car. But the moment we get actually got on hold on the car after we receive the vehicle, we inform the manufacturer, the VIN number, the model of car, and the market that we are going to be testing that car for. And not only that, we invite the manufacturer to come to the test, to witness the crash test. And on top of that, we asked the manufacturer immediately to tell us what are the child seats that they recommend for the different child dummies or the child occupants that are going to be sitting in that crash test. So the manufacturers know from the very first beginning that we're going to be testing those cars. Moreover, most manufacturers do know how those cars will perform because usually they monitor their production or they know what they are selling in different markets. So usually there's no surprise on the results that we're going to show. So let's show the results directly. Please play the video. The models that we're going to be testing this time is the Toyota Yaris, 2 airbags as standard, made in Thailand. The Kia Picanto, 1 airbag, driver airbag, made in South Korea. Hyundai i20, 2 airbags as standard, made in India. And the Nissan NP300 hardbody, 2 airbags, made in South Africa. So summary of the vehicles we are testing: Toyota Yaris, 2 airbags, Picanto, driver airbag, Hyundai i20, 2 airbags, and Nissan NP300 hardbody, 2 airbags. The Yaris, 2 airbags, 3 stars for adults, and 3 stars for child occupant protection. You can see the color dummies as well in the screen. We are now going to watch the video, I mean the crash test itself. First on real speed, and now on slow motion or high-speed film. The structure was rated as unstable. The reason is that it was not possible for that structure to withstand further loadings than the one we have tested so far. The car offers standard 3-point belts for all seating positions, ISOFIX connectors as well for child seats. As you can see, airbags and pretensioner work pretty well to prevent a lot of injuries or critical injuries in the driver and passenger as well, in both adults. And the child seat systems, both of them, the child restraint systems, worked very well as well to protect the children, the child occupants in a proper way. So this car actually is rated, as I mentioned, on 3 stars adults, 3 stars for child occupant protection. Kia Picanto driver airbag, 3 stars for adult and 2 stars for child occupant protection. Here we see the color dummies. Now we're going to watch the crash test of these cars. Here's the real speed. And we're now going to go for the slow motion. As you can see, the structure, in this case, the structure was criticized, or let's say classified as stable, so it can withstand further loadings. The airbag on the driver's side made a good work trying to avoid the driver hitting the steering wheel and having heavy injuries as well. Passenger side, without an airbag, the readings were not that critical. But we had, and you will see now from the inside, a problem, a mislatch or an unlatch of the child seat on the 3-year-old. You will see it in the next screen. The 1.5-year-old was okay in the protection, but the 3-year-old that you can see now in the screen unlatched from the ISOFIX connectors. In this case, we are waiting for some more information, and I will brief you in more detail later because the video is running quite fast. The Hyundai i20, 2 airbags, 3 stars for adults, 2 stars for child occupant protection. And now here we have the color dummies, and we got comments on those a little bit later. The car we're watching now, the movie, structure was rated as unstable. Both airbags work properly to prevent serious injuries in driver and passenger. The pretensions as well worked in a proper way. This car does not offer ISOFIX anchorages as standard, so the child seats in both cases were used belted. And as explained, airbags worked properly. The child occupant protection for the 1.5-year-old was in the level of acceptable, but the 3-year-old had some measurements and also impact of the head of the dummy into the interior of the car that made the car lose points on the child occupant protection as well. Last but not least, the Nissan NP300 hardbody, 2 airbags. It's a 0-star for adults and 2 stars for child occupant protection. In this case, we had critical body region damaged in the head and chest of the driver. And here's the movie, the real speed movie. And now the slow motion movie. The structure clearly collapsed. The airbags were not, they couldn't do too much to prevent serious injuries. The steering column, as you could see, invaded the driver's side. There's no collapse in the steering column. The collapse of the structure itself compromises any other effort of the restraint system trying to prevent injuries on the adult occupants. We were, in this case, also a discussion on the child seat position. The 1.5-year-old was okay, but the car doesn't offer ISOFIX anchorages, but the 3-year-old child seat, by push from the manufacturer, it was used in a position that should not be used according to the child seat manufacturer. So that's a reason, another reason to have a low result in the child occupant protection of this car. Summary of results is the Toyota Yaris 2 airbags, 3 stars for adults and 3 stars for child occupant protection. The Kia Picanto, just driver airbag, it's 3 stars for adults and 3 stars for occupants. Sorry, I have here 3 stars for adults and 2 stars for child occupant protection on the Picanto. On the Picanto, the unlatch, or actually the problem with the ISOFIX unlatching immediately after the impact, it's as we explained, there were 2 actions taken. First, and something important to say, when we are testing a car on the child occupant protection, we are testing a combination of a child seat and a car. A low result doesn't mean that the child seat is going to be, with any other car, is going to perform bad, or that car with any other child seat is going to perform bad, or the other way around, or vice versa. So what we're testing is a combination. That car we tested, the Picanto, with those child seats, that's the result it's going to offer. Probably with a different child seat, the result might be different. We don't know. But once again, the child seats are recommended by the car manufacturer. There's no one that knows the car better than the car manufacturer himself. So we expect the car manufacturer to know or recommend the best child seat that can be fitted in that car to that kind of crash test. On top of that, for GlobalNCAP, the manufacturer is responsible for the safety of all occupants, child and adults. So they should know and be aware what's the best solution, the best child seat to install in the car. So as mentioned, the issue or the problem of the mislatch is still under investigation from the car manufacturer, and we're expecting also, we are doing our own research as well to go deeper into the issue, and it's a deep concern for us. On top of that, immediate reaction from the child seat manufacturer is that they, Maxi Gozzi were the child seats that we used in that test, and the manufacturer of the child seat decided to remove the Kia Picanto from the recommended cars for this kind of child seat. As you know, ISOFIX seats, they do have a list of cars where that child seat can be installed safely in those cars. And Maxi Gozzi, after this event, they decided, or this scenario, they decided to remove the Kia Picanto from the recommended car list on this vehicle. Hyundai i20 was 3 stars for adults and 2 stars for the child occupant protection. In this car, comments to say is that it's a car which is named in the same way as the same model, or looks like the same model in Europe. However, structure in this car did not perform in the same way as the European version. Under the skin, those structures are different. On top of that, we were surprised that a brand new car doesn't have ISOFIX standards. ISOFIX anchorages are standard. In this car, it's not a standard fitment. And also in the rear, you only have 2 3-point belts instead of 3-point belts, which you're expecting in a platform which is quite new. About the Nissan NP300, the hard body 2 airbags are standard. It's a 0 star for adults and 2 stars for child occupant protection. As you have seen, the collapse of the structure explains the serious injuries that were captured and recorded by the driver. Even with airbags, safety was not good enough to prevent those injuries. And regarding the child occupant protection, the 2 stars, it's explained by what I mentioned earlier, that the 3-year-old dummy, the child seat, was, by request of the manufacturer, to installed in a way that is not recommended by the child seat manufacturer. So, and this actually explains the loss of points in the protection of that case. A summary of results that we have shown since last year and this year. So this listed in the screen, you have all the cars we tested so far. We have tested since 2017. It's important to say that our estimations are between, if we put together the cars we tested 2017 and 2018, we more or less have covered around 65% of the sales volume of the cars under 250,000 runs. This is a very significant coverage, considering that the funding we have is quite limited. Main conclusions regarding the adult occupant protection. Body shell integrity is critical for the protection of occupants, even in cars fitted with airbags. 3 of the 4 cars that we selected, in this case, they showed unstable body shells. NP300, i20, and Yaris. The absence of airbags and cars with poor body shell integrity, even fitted with airbags, showed high risk of life-threatening injuries for the passengers in a crash that it's actually was recently shown in cars with airbags. The issue on this point is that when we have tested in the past some cars with an unstable body shell, and manufacturers immediately, without airbags, and manufacturers reacted, okay, that car with airbags would perform better. What we have here is a clear example that airbags in an unstable structure would not be enough to protect occupants in a proper way. All tested cars showed very low protection levels in the leg area. Can you play the videos, please? Body shell integrity, as I said, is critical for the protection of occupants. And you can see both examples, 2 cars, airbags, unstable body shells, and in both of them, critical body regions damaged for drivers. Probably, if we wouldn't have tested those cars, especially the MP300 for the case of South Africa, we wouldn't have known about this. Probably the manufacturer, yes, but not the consumer. This is how we found the MP300 after the crash. And for a second, imagine that this is a dummy, it's not a real human being. Dummy is robustly built with metal parts. Probably a human being would have looked a bit more different in terms of injuries and the position of the dummy. About the child occupant protection, it was actually rated in low in the cases where there is marginal to poor protection to the child dummies offered by the child restraint systems. We found some incompatibility between the child seats and the cars, and also poor instructions on the child seats. CRS, CRS is actually the terms, it's child restraint systems. We use that just to make the full name, or name it in a full way, but just to be aware that every time there's a CRS written, it's child restraint systems. The unlatching of the 3-year-old, as I mentioned earlier, of the Picanto is deep concern of organization, and the CRS manufacturer, as immediate action, removed the Picanto from the recommended list, and there is further investigation going on. As soon as we have the results from that, you will be, the public will be informed about it. We found actually some good readings, so let's say good protection in some cars where the structure is weak. So when you have a structure which collapses in the front and deforms dramatically, that bit works like an energy absorption part of the car, which is of course not desirable because you get the adults very seriously injured. In those cars, you can still see good dummy readings, good child dummy protection, because the front of the car is acting like a cushion, which is not desirable. Last but not least, only one of the 4 models that we tested was the Yaris, was equipped with 3-point belts in all sitting positions. This is also a high concern, and when we are looking for new platforms. The Picanto, the i20, and the Yaris, I would say, what we would say is a new generation, a new platform, so a new generation of cars. And we were surprised to see those cars without 3-point belts in all sitting positions, which is normal to expect in this kind of vehicles. The market worldwide works like a system where you have a government setting a minimum regulation and the market pulling for high demand. Of course, governments need to do their job. But if you, for a moment, we take a picture of what happens in Australia, in the US, or in Europe, the high levels of protection they have in their cars is not directly linked to the regulation itself. It's more directly linked to the 4- and 5-star cars they have in most of the fleets. So when we take a look at those countries, or those markets, and we say, oh, they have a great level of protection in cars, or let's say the injury rate or the fatality rate in people actually in their cars, and also pedestrians, is not that high. It's mostly explained by the NCAP push, which is usually beyond regulation. It's more demanding than regulation, and it's earlier than regulations. So if for a moment we think about what would happen in Europe, for example, if there would have been no NCAP in the last 20 years, and the cars were just meeting regulation, probably the scenario would be completely different. What we're saying is that governments, of course, need to move forward, but the NCAPs are the best catalyzer you have for the market to accelerate and bring those better safety standards or better safety protection levels into the game for the consumers' availability on a voluntary basis. So consumers are demanding more, manufacturers are offering better safety because they want to achieve higher star ratings. So this is, once again, it's not a competition between governments, not a race between governments and consumers. It's something that has to work together. And just a sample of that. If you take a look at what happens in Australian NCAP, US NCAP, and IHS, and what happens in Europe, in these three markets, the governments are directly involved with NCAPs because they know that regulation is not going to go as fast as people want to happen because the industry has certain timings. But the consumer demand can shift the market in less than 2 years. And this is already happening. That's the reason why we encourage you as much as possible to create that system in Africa as soon as possible. South Africa is a contracting party of the 1958 agreement. We mentioned that last year. So there is a big step forward already in South Africa. It's very relevant. You're a contracting party. So adopting regulations or signing regulations is already on the way, and it already happens in most relevant regulations, as we are showing in the screen. So the bid of the government, one big step is already done. It has to be controlled in a proper way, and of course with cooperation with an NCAP, things will look different. Can you please play all the videos? Another big question mark is we tested frontal tests, but what happens in the side impact? When we started this in Latin America, all cars started to get 3 and 4 stars. And all of a sudden, we started 2016 to test on the side impact. And those 4-star cars ended up being 0 again. Because the side impact, we didn't know what happened. That was, of course, an evolution of the program, an evolution of the NCAP. So that probably might be an important question mark and something else to address or next to address in the markets of Africa pretty soon as well. In those examples, on the right side of the screen, you have good performing cars. On the left side of the screen, you have poor performing cars. We also played a comparison. You know this car. This car is called, in Latin America, it's called the Ka, also Figo. You also have the Figo here. It's made in India. So we played a comparison between the Ford Ka Figo for our markets and the European version. And this is the price I'm showing you. It's a price in Mexico. That car was 11, just put in euros, is 11.69 thousand euros. The same car in Germany is less than 10,000, but there is a big difference. Take a look at the equipment rates. If you see the basic version, sorry, in Brazil, not Mexico, the basic version in Brazil, you will have only frontal airbags as standard, no side airbags on the body, no side airbags on the heads, no ESC, and you will have ABS. But if you buy the basic version in Europe, you pay less money, and you will have as a standard 6 airbags, plus ESC, plus ABS. Point here is we should not be forced to pay more for safety. That's the main point. And we went a bit beyond in this comparison. We tested for Latin America in 2017 the Ford Ka, also called Figo for you. We tested side impact. Frontal impact of the car was 4 stars in 2015, but we tested side impact and see how it worked. It was a 0-star car in the side impact. And if you can see the pictures, you will see it from the top, the penetration of the side impact barrier, and also the dummy, the colors of the dummies. You will see that there is a red chest. That's critical body region. That's actually what explains the 0 stars. But take a look at what happens in the same car in Europe. You will see that the structure on the side is not that deformed as in the red car. And there are 2 other things, side body airbags and side curtain airbags. And the protection of the driver, you will see there, it's green. You will see the picture from the top on the red and the white car, and you will see the deformation is different. But Ford reacted very, very fast, and even earlier and beyond governmental regulations, and they improved the car. So we tested it once again in 2018, which is the last picture on the right. As you can see, if you compare both ends of the image, the red car and the white car on the right, deformation it's less in the latest test for Latin America. But still, it's not the same level of deformation we see in the European car. And beyond that, the equipment is not the same as the European version. And if you compare the colors of the dummies, the chest of the 2018 car for Latin America, it's brown. It's not red. It just improved a little bit beyond the requirements just to make it a 3-star car. But still, it's falling behind the European version. So as we just said, it's a system. It's a consumer demand and governmental regulations as well. Please play the videos. NCAPs have a great influence in the market. These cars you're seeing in the crash test, this is a public test. It's a Fiesta. It's a 20-year difference between one Fiesta and the other. The Fiesta, the dark green Fiesta, is the Fiesta that was built 20 years ago. And the silver Fiesta is not the most latest recent for Europe, but one of the most recent models for, this is 2017 model for Europe as well, which is the one you have here. And the levels of protection, you will see that the formation in the Fiesta, in the green Fiesta, it's much more dramatic than the one in silver. Both same models, same setup in the markets. And this improvement of 20 years of regulations, of, let's say, the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of the regulation for the frontal crash test, together with an NCAP, made that happen. And the relevant thing is that when Euro NCAP and US and Australia started to push for the NCAPs and started to bring consumer information and the star ratings, they had to push the industry to improve even beyond, to develop. The great thing is that we are standing 20 years after that, and the manufacturers, they already have this technology on the shelves. They already know it. They already developed it. We're just pushing to make these technologies available standard for our markets. As general conclusions, the GlobalNCAP recommends to implement Regulation 94 and 95, front and side crash protection as mandatory according to the 1958 agreement. South Africa is already a contracting party of the 1958 agreement. GlobalNCAP recommends all governments to make the child restraint system mandatory use and also regulated by the technical regulation. South Africa signed the Regulation 129 for child seats, but is not implementing the Regulation 44. So it's a very favorable condition for the market itself, but it has to be pushed further on. GlobalNCAP also strongly recommends the government to implement mandatory ESC regulation and also pedestrian protection regulation. There is a regulation that says how the car must be developed in the front to prevent serious injuries to pedestrians under certain conditions. We also recommend the automobile clubs, consumer organizations, car and child seat manufacturers, also to governments, to work together and improve this very fast. You can shift the market pretty quickly if you have proper consumer information at the same time that regulations are coming and are moving forwards. And in the same line, as I mentioned earlier, being a contracting party from South Africa, there's a big step already taken. So it's just about enforcing those requirements and regulations. Before I finish my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the FI Foundation and the Bloomberg Philanthropies and GlobalNCAP for making this possible. I also want to acknowledge the great support of a local team, the Automobile Club, Collins, Philip, and Leighton. Thank you very much. And also the GlobalNCAP team, that it's actually the ones that do all this work, led by David Ward. Here with me is Rafael Tucci is also an engineer from the technical team as well from GlobalNCAP. And with all together, we could develop and take this forward. We would like to see very soon to have the NCAP or a local NCAP in Africa becoming a reality. And we understand that it's an interaction, as we said, from consumers, industry, and government, all working together. An NCAP, or making an NCAP mandatory, imagine that for a second, in Latin America, we just showed results, and cars, at least what we estimate, 700,000 units per year were improved voluntarily just because of what we showed. And we tested just a few cars. Imagine what would happen if we test all cars in the markets. Voluntarily, manufacturers will react and we change faster than regulation, just because of consumer pressure. Fleet managers, they can do a great job on this. They can help us a lot. Fleet managers, they can say, I'm going to buy only 4-star cars or 5-star cars, like it happened, for example, in Australia. And it's happening also in Latin America. So they also can shift. They have a huge leverage, and they can shift the market pretty quick. So it's working all together. And there is one bit which is relevant to say. Sometimes manufacturers object to mandatory labeling or mandatory star rating to inform consumers on the star levels of a car. But at the end of the story, it's the consumers that actually have the right to decide what to buy. Some manufacturers will probably choose to keep buying 0-star cars and 1-star cars. And it's for the government to still allow all the cars to be shown, but just to inform consumers of the star rating. And some consumers will probably choose to buy higher star rating cars. We never know, but at least consumers are informed. And this is going to be shifting the market much, much quicker than regulations. So thank you very much, and we're open for questions.
Thanks, Alejandro. I think those results were quite revealing. And I think when a lot of people see some of those results, they are taken aback. And I think what Collins and Alejandro have both shown is that there is not only a need for safer vehicles in South Africa, but that the push for safer vehicles doesn't necessarily have to come from government. It has to come from people like you, basically. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Collins. I'd now like to open the floor for any questions, if there are any, and I'll take them one at a time. Please introduce yourself and also the publication that you represent or the organization that you represent.
Well done. Good one.
Craig.
Morning. Thank you for that, Alejandro. Craig Proctor-Parker from Fleetwatch. I'd like to know, you mentioned that the manufacturers were invited. Did any of them actually attend?
I'm sorry, if they were invited to attend.
Yeah.
Yes.
For the crash.
Yeah. Actually, every time it's a standard for NCAPs. Every time we test a car, they are invited to witness the test for two reasons. Point one is transparency. At the side of the test, they can check that the protocols are being followed strictly according to what it's written. Second, at the time of the test, they get a copy of the data we record. So they take it back to their own offices and develop or try to estimate what's going to be the results. After that, it takes us some days, weeks to make the analysis. And when we finalize the report, we share the report with the car manufacturer before publishing. So the manufacturers not just know about the data, raw data at the time of the test and the witness test, but they also know about the result before we publish. So after we share this document, which is the report, we had a one-to-one, what it's called one-to-one meeting, face-to-face or by teleconference. We explain them what are the results and the reasons for our concerns, and we allow manufacturers to give us some feedback. Sometimes it's there are feedback if it's a negative result. The feedback is that they will improve the car. Sometimes it's a feedback in terms of explaining or trying to explain what happened. But the last word and last decision bit comes from the NCAP side.
Sorry, I think, Craig, if I understand your question, in this round of testing, what manufacturers actually attended?
Which ones? That's a good one. Trying to recall because I was not in all the tests, but Nissan definitely. Also, Toyota was present, and I don't remember if Hyundai, Kia as well. At least for the i20 when we were there, I think there was no one. No, there was no one there. But Toyota and Nissan, yeah.
The other two manufacturers did?
No, actually, I was in one of the tests. I don't remember pretty well, but. Actually, in fact, in the i20, they said they could not come. They couldn't make it. And Picanto, they also announced they couldn't come. But it's worth it to say that every time we do this, in the case we do it, these tests are being done in Europe, in Germany. The reason we do it there, it's the ADAC, it's Automobile Club. And they're very familiar how the Automobile Club. And the reference we have for the Kia Hyundai cars, it's a European office, which is Hyundai, Kia together. It's in this case, manufacturer is very familiar how ADAC works, and it's more related to not acknowledging what we do, but basically it's more a reaction saying we trust in what you do and we don't need to be there.
Okay. Yes, Wendy Nola. Introduce yourself. I don't think I'll.
No.
Alex. Wendy Nola from TISA Black Star and Cape Talk. In this round and in the last round of South African cars being tested, did any of the local manufacturers dispute the findings in any way? And secondly, if I can have a second question, talking about the body shell being stable versus unstable, could you talk us through what determines that? What in the design or manufacture or quality of steel or whatever makes a body shell unstable?
I will start for the second part. Most of the manufacturers today, they have the tools to develop cars from the design standpoint to make them a stable structure and good performing, most of them. Some of them use a strategy where directing the energy in different load paths in the car, it's going to help them absorb the energy and prevent the energy reaching the passengers. So there are different strategies from that standpoint. But sometimes, or main reasons why manufacturers are tempted in some cases to have or sacrifice the structural performance. Sometimes it's needed due to cost and trying to save money. Ways to save money, for example, in GlobalNCAP and India and Africa are very good examples because we have tested cars which are different, looking the same as European models, for example, but they do perform different in the crash test we do. And in those cases, they save, for example, they save money in production lines like steel quality, spot welds, kind of quality of spot welds. Some cases it's in purpose, and in some cases it's indirect result. Why? In terms of saving money or speed up the process of production, they want to have more cars produced per hour, so the welding procedure is a little bit different. Sometimes they decide to save cost in maintenance of welding machines or welding equipment. Sometimes they just save money in reinforcements. So one less, you avoid, or you say, save putting one reinforcement is less steel and less parts you're putting in the car, and you save a few dollars per car, and then you make a full production of 100,000 cars. You're saving $3, $4, $5 per part, and you make it a whole number. It's about the savings. So there are voluntary and involuntary decisions on this. In some cases, we had cases where the car is properly designed and properly produced, but there was a problem of the production control, where the manufacturer didn't monitor production in a proper way, and they couldn't catch production issues right on time, and they were caught actually or identified when we tested the car. Repeat me, sorry, the first question you had.
In speaking specifically of the South African cars last year, this year, did any of the manufacturers dispute any of your findings?
If they questioned our funding.
If they questioned the results.
No, probably one. We had discussions, for example, the technical discussions regarding the criteria for stability or not stability of the structure. But as we always say, and you will see it in the publication, when we say that a structure is stable, what we are saying is that it can withstand further loadings. So we basically, every time we get a comment from a manufacturer saying, oh, you rated it in the wrong way, then we challenge them to say, show us that in a little bit more load case, this structure will perform the same or will not deform worse than what we have seen in test. And none of them challenged that or took that challenge on board. And we were two questions, or basically questions regarding or questioning the child seat selection, and they wanted to choose different child seats that are not available in the South African market but are clearly performing better. And we... no, it's very... It's very relevant because they recommend a child seat which globally they know that perform well. But when we came back to check in South Africa, we say it's not available, so you need to choose another child seat, and most of them showed them a bit disappointed. But from the consumer perspective, it wouldn't make too much of a sense that we show a result of a car child seat that you can't combine in the markets.
But you have to ship those child seats over as well?
Usually, yes. If you can find the same model locally, then we source it locally. We check with the child seat manufacturer that there is no changes, or they are exported to South Africa from Europe, and that's it.
Any more, Wendy? Right. Anybody else? Yes. Sorry, Eugene. Sorry. I'll get to you in a second.
Thanks, Eugene from Master Drive. The fact that the Nissan NP200 is the technology is old, how does that factor into the decisions and the feedback that the manufacturer has justified for its results possibly? Has that been taken into account?
Sorry, you're talking about the 300 or the 200?
Sorry, the NP300, yeah.
Okay, good question. Our starting point is consumer testing. So we're consumers. We go to the market and we see what's available and we buy it. If it's an old car with an old technology and still made available, that's the decision of the manufacturer. And the manufacturer knows that we are testing cars around. We criticize hardly from these manufacturers that they know how this car performed. They are very aware of this car, how these vehicles perform in a crash test. And they know the risk to the drivers and potential all the occupants. And their action or their decision is to keep selling those cars. So our work is to inform consumers about that. We criticize hardly that when manufacturers know how to build a safer car, they're not doing it for emerging markets. In the case of the NP300, it's a car which is popular in the whole continent. If you go to Africa, it's a very popular car as well. So back to the point, if there is an old version or an old technology car available in the market, that's the decision of the manufacturer. The manufacturer wants to keep selling a car which is probably engineered 20 years ago. But from consumer perspective, we have to test it and inform consumers how it performs.
Does that cover you, Eugene? Yes, the gentleman in the back. Can you just introduce yourself in the publication? Thank you.
Morning. Hear me? Okay. My name is Marike Kamhlabe from the South African Broadcasting Corporation, that is the SABC. Most of the stories that we cover in terms of crashes involve public transport, and that's your taxis, or CIR as is known in South Africa, as well as quantums. So I'm just wondering, are you also planning to look into that? Probably get to give us a picture in terms of how these crashes happen and how they could be prevented.
Good question. I will try to split the answer into parts, but one of it is, of course, public transport is very relevant as well, but the different masses and buying decisions in both segments is different. Passenger cars, you have more consumers choosing individually what car to buy. When you're buying a fleet of cars for public transport, it's usually one buyer or one or two or three buyers that actually make a whole lot of cars at once. So from that perspective, it's more urgent to inform consumers individually. On the I would say, massive transportation vehicles, GlobalNCAP did some testing a few years ago, and we haven't discarded to go deeper into that and assessing also those vehicles as well. But as I said, it's from the consumer perspective and decision making, it's probably one or two organizations. It's a concentrated decision. When we have many consumers choosing many cars at the same time that are populating the roads, these are probably the most urgent in terms of information. But we haven't discarded the other ones. We will, of course, go deeper as well into massive transport. Another thing to say is that, as you mentioned, there are, I didn't mention in my presentation, but it's worth to mention, there are some technologies that are becoming more and more available to the world that probably 2 years ago it would have looked like rocket science or sci-fi developments, but they are not. There are technologies like, for example, autonomous emergency braking systems, which are systems that when you are driving the car and you're not braking in a proper time, the car brakes for you. Doesn't matter if you're accelerating or not. If the car detects that you're not reacting on time, the car will stop for you. And those technologies are a great advance in crash prevention globally. And our encouragement is more to try to find incentives for those technologies. Just as an example, in Europe, commercial vehicles must have autonomous emergency braking as standard for models that are actually being launched as from 2015. So 2015 cars, commercial vehicles, they need to have the autonomous emergency braking systems on board. And when you're talking about a truck, in the whole value of the truck and the cost of the truck, or large commercial vehicles, these AEB technologies are really a marginal cost. They're not very expensive, even if you want to buy this technology as an extra or optional. So we are suggesting also to try to start encouraging those technologies in the market, especially for fleet and commercial vehicles as well.
Cool. Thank you. Vui?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vui Majola from Santaco, the South African National Taxi Council. 15 million commuters every day we move, and we rely on test results given by the manufacturers of the vehicles that we use in the taxi industry. Now, the taxi industry, in its efforts to reposition itself to the commuters, we have started working together with the Automobile Association, and we are going to be crash testing the vehicles. I would be interested to hear if any of the manufacturers that manufacture vehicles specifically for the taxi industry are here, because we are throwing out the challenge there. If they're interested in working together with us, it would be a great stance towards ensuring commuter safety. But we are going to be doing it. I think the next round of crash tests will be taxi vehicles. That includes Nissan, Toyota, especially Mercedes-Benz, and VW. Thank you.
Great. I'll get you in a minute, Roger. Adrian? Age before beauty, Roger.
Morning. Adrian Burford, Roadworks Communications. On the face of it, it actually looks like international manufacturers are offering third world consumers less safety for more money, and quite deliberately. The footage you showed of the Brazilian Figo versus German Figo, clearly there was a difference in what had been done structurally on the side, and I think you said that the I-20 suggested some differences in the test between what gets sold in a third world country versus a first world country. I mean, can we come to the conclusion that motor manufacturers are deliberately taking advantage of third world consumers?
Good question. I think that manufacturers are, in this case, are taking advantage of the lack of information to consumers in certain markets. Because from the legal standpoint, those cars are legal to be sold in South Africa. We bought them here, so they are legal. But as I said, consumer information or consumer testing programs usually test beyond regulation, a bit beyond, not that far. And so far, we started last year testing in South Africa. Our expectation is that as we start testing more and as more consumers are aware of this, more and more media is actually communicating, explaining this, and more fleet managers taking action, saying, I'm not going to buy that car because it's a 3-star, I want to buy only 4 and 5 or 5 stars for my fleet. That's going to shift the market in less than a year, or probably in less than 2 years, because that's actually what happened in the other markets. It's all about consumer information. Always regulation goes in a certain path, which is probably responding more to industry interest and the dynamics of the industry, which it differs from one market to the other. But when it comes to consumer information and market pressure, manufacturers can't resist to that, because basically they will be, losing sales, we're just dropping sales. And you always have 1 or 2 manufacturers that want to aim to satisfy consumers that are willing to have a 5 or get a 5-star car instead of a 2-star car. And when you get that, always one manufacturer responding to it, then the race is done. I mean, the race is on. And manufacturers start to compete. This information of consumer information and safety is just one extra bit of information for consumers to take a decision on what car to buy. It might happen that it's a relevant decision, or it actually comes up in priority in your market, or it might not happen that. But usually, normally, the reaction is that consumers put the safety or start having safety as far as they have the information. They start to make safety more and more relevant into the decision to buy a new car.
Which is all well and good, but in that German versus Brazilian scenario, not only were you getting less safety, but you were paying more.
Yes, we hardly criticize that as well. But manufacturers react saying there's a tax issue. And but once again, we always respond to that in a different way. We say it's a tax issue, but in relative terms, it's more expensive for a Brazilian pay 11,000 than for a European paying 10,000. It's bigger efforts. What is going to change that in the market? What can change Ford decision into making the car in a better performing car? It's consumer pressure. So they try to bring the car to a 3-star level. That's what they did with this very I would say basic improvements. And let's see how the market reacts. Probably the market would say, yeah, but it's not good enough. You can do that better and cheaper for other markets. Why not for us? If the market goes in that direction of the pressure, or the pressure goes in that direction, then things will change. It's worth to mention that there is a strong confrontation in Brazil and in Latin American markets, because manufacturers don't want star ratings to be published and don't want star ratings to be, broadcasted to everyone. From what is being done there, for example, there is a free app that will be launched very soon for mobile phones, and you can have right-on-time updates on results. And this kind of strategy is actually a strong communication, help with the media, the journalists here, also the social media, and the Automobile Club. When we make people aware of it, this is shifting the market. The reason why Ford decided to bring the car from a 0-star to a 3-star, it was for market pressure, because Brazilians are not willing to pay for a 1-star car. Now they think that 3-star is okay. Probably that would be the case for a short period of time. But after we see some cars from that price range reaching 5 stars, then let's see if Ford is going to keep that decision, or they're going to improve the car beyond what we have seen so far.
I think you covered that, Adrian. Yeah. Mr. McCleary?
Roger McCleary, Radio Today. Alexander, the death rate that we have horrific death rates here. And all your crash tests all depend on fitting seat belts.
Yeah.
Now, the ones with lower death rates in countries around the world, particularly Europe, do they enforce the wearing of seat belts? Because here the attitude in some areas is it's actually cool not to even wear a seat belt. I mean, taxis go around, not a soul has got a seat belt on, and they don't actually care. and is not enforced at all. Do those other countries that have lower death rates enforce their seatbelt strongly?
Yes, point one. There is actually, strongly enforced. But there are other things that we're doing from the NCAP perspective. As you have seen in my presentation, I showed that to get a 5-star, seatbelt reminders, it's a key, it's a must. If you don't have seatbelt reminders are not just seatbelt reminders as by regulation. We are actually requesting a more, I would say, insisting system in the car. So it's a bit more annoying, I would say, when you're not using a belt. That's actually one of the first technological side we can do, is try to persuade the driver or insist with the driver from the system in the car to use the belt. That's the point one. But of course, belts, if you have a car with I don't know how many airbags, or as many airbags as you want, you're not wearing a belt, the result is not going to be the one that we might be showing at the same car in a 5-star. So it's a belt use, it's a must, 100%. In those markets where you mentioned, actually, yes, the seat belt is actually a must. It's mandatory use and being enforced and policed quite, I would say, in a very drastic and strong way. In fact, in some markets, as a driver, you're responsible that all your passengers are wearing a belt. So if you're driving your car, even if you're wearing a belt, and any of your passengers that you are sitting in the car with you are not wearing a belt, you get ticketed as well, and pretty high. So the way that it's enforced is, of course, a key thing as well. But from our side, our perspective, we're trying to push it from the technological side. We also are tempted sometimes to ask for seatbelt reminder systems which are a bit more demanding and more insisting systems, or pretty, I would say, more annoying sometimes to people not wearing a seatbelt. And I think this is going to come probably in the next few years.
Okay. Yes. Rob Hanfield-Jones first. We'll go to Rob. I'll go to Wendy, and then I'll go to Michael after. And then we'll go to Mr. Cocaine. We'll get to you in a second.
Thanks. Rob Hanfield-Jones from driving.co.za. You've talked a lot about the safety improvements that you'd like to see, and I'm sure you've seen a lot in your career. If you could pick a single safety improvement which you'd like to see in all vehicles going forwards, what would it be?
Technology has been showing that, the progress has been showing that it's not just one safety feature, that it's making a safer car, a safer system. There are many that were actually got along together. But it's worth to say seatbelt is probably the one that brought the most dramatic change. The seatbelt, and of course the proper performing seatbelts and being used as well. It's estimated that electronic stability control is capable of saving as many lives as the seatbelt. So that's the other key technologies. But once again, it's not one more than the other. There are basic things, basic protections that must be 100% in a car. Frontal crash protection, side crash protection, electronic stability control, pedestrian protection, and regulations like seatbelt anchorages and seatbelts as well. That's absolute minimum that must be sitting in the car. That doesn't mean that for that we're going to give a 5-star. A 5-star for us is a car that gives almost full integrity after you crash. And it's not one of the other technologies. All technologies are developed all together. I would put it in a different way. What if I mention one technology, and if that technology is missing, then the whole car will be a disaster. It's a system, as we showed the NP300. You have airbags, you have seat belts, the structure doesn't work. It's not keeping the shape of the protection of the passenger, of the occupants. So it's not just one or the other. From terms of life-saving potential, as I said, the seat belt is one ESC. It's capable of saving almost as many lives as the seat belts. But in terms of crashworthiness, it's a whole system together that can protect people in the way it does. I don't know if that response probably is not what you expected to hear, but but always if you don't have a structure as a starting point, a good structure, a performing structure, then you have usually an issue. You can have all the systems on board, as you could see, but you can't protect. So it's all together and working properly, coordinately. In a good coordination, good firing system, and a good capacity as well to prevent injuries. It's all together.
All right. Just before I go to Wendy for her question, I just want to inform all of you the results with the pictures, with the videos of the tests that were done, with a press release is available outside on a flash drive for you after the presentation. So I just wanted to make that clear. Wendy, your question?
Okay. I'm already seeing on social media, but I'm already seeing on social media consumers saying, oh, what about this car? What about that car? It's so unsafe. And so there's now already, the media, the exposure is driving an expectation among some consumers that they want to see these results on other vehicles. Number one, assuming that the manufacturers of the lower-end cars whose cars weren't tested aren't going to be gloating at all because, as you say, they know how their cars would test. And secondly, you've done 4 cars last year, 4 cars this year. Can we expect the same going forward? Is this going to be an annual thing? Because I think you certainly have created an expectation of that.
Well, thank you for the question. On one side, we expect this to continue from our side, but every time we come to a new market, so we expect is that the local market takes the lead and actually develops its own NCAP. Of course, NCAP testing requires a lot of funding. What we have been doing now, we are picking cars that we want to see or we want to test, and that requires a lot of money. Funding is usually a problem for this kind of test. But if you have strategies from the government, as I mentioned in my presentation and along a couple of answers, that the government is requesting a mandatory star rating or a mandatory labeling. Like, for example, the Moroni label in the 60s in the US. You go to the US now, you buy a car, and you will see on the label in the windscreen, it's a star rating. The car has to be star rated. So if you have something like that, then all the cars will be star rated. Therefore, all consumers will have information when they are buying a new car. But it has to come from a mandatory requirement, so something that has to come from the governmental side to decide. Or fleet managers also can put a lot of pressure on that. Mandatory labeling is cost zero for the government. It's if you don't have it, you're not rated, you can't sell your car. It's as simple as that. Yes. Or the other way of doing it is when you get infinite funding and you can keep doing it non-stop. That's the other way. But the example of the US and the Moroni label, it's a very good example of what is being done. And it's actually the consumer decision which is driving the market to have safer cars.
Okay. Roy?
Sorry, let me just add something else, Wendy, which is worth to say. You can expect 2 things to happen. Probably consumers will stick to the price and would not mind for star rating. That can happen. We don't expect it to happen because always there is one manufacturer that want to set the race. They want to be the first. Now we're in a racing track, but in terms of safety, they want to have the 5 stars. And second, some manufacturers will not be able to afford to have a poor star rating next to their label, to their brand. So those 2 things are actually pushing the market through. I doubt that there will be car manufacturers. You will still, after the mandatory star rating system, I doubt that you will keep having, after 2 years, 0 1-star cars in the market for either of the 2 reasons I mentioned.
But maybe just to add on to that, Wendy, on our side, from the AA, when we started last year, the intention was for us to see if it was going to continue. But now, I think with the second level of testing, we feel that is definitely something that we would like to see continue. But we are out there looking for funding to make sure that it continues. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a message to the OEMs.
The unfortunate reality is, as we sit here today, none of these manufacturers need to publicly advertise and declare those ratings on their cars.
Yeah, well, that's
up to the media.
It's for you to put pressure, for the public opinion to put pressure, to encourage the government to do it. From fleet managers' side, it's a whole system. You can work together. You can make a brilliant job very, very quick.
Phil, I'll come to you in a minute. Roy? Yeah, you, Roy.
Mike.
Hello, Roy Cocaine from Business Report. This question touches on what you have just commented on, and also something that you said in your presentation about the Australian, US, and Europe governments being directly involved in NCAP. Has there been any direct government involvement in South Africa with this, or any desire to get involved? And the other issue is that the cars that have to get homologated in South Africa have to go to the South African Bureau of Standards, which is actually in administration and dysfunctional. So I don't know what the impact of that is on vehicle safety and all the rest of the things. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I will start with the second bit. NCAPs are different than homologation in terms of requirements. We are more demanding usually. So when you go to each country, each market has its own standards, its own way to homologate cars, and it's very different from one to the other. But when you're in a system where you have a mandatory labeling, usually the cost of that it's coming from the car manufacturer that has to have their own star rating. If you go to the 1958 agreement, UN agreement, United Nations, where South Africa is a contracting party, and you want to get your car certified, your certification for type approval, the cost of that, it's relying on the manufacturer. It's the car manufacturer, not the government, to get that certificate. The government has some marginal cost in terms of doing all the administrative process inside. Regarding the other one, the other question, it's regarding the governments and the involvement in the NCAPs, that one. In terms of the funding, directly just to give you a picture, Euro NCAP has 5 governments sitting at the board, and all of them are contributing with money, with funds every year. The reason why they are involved is because the NCAP can say things that and can show and communicate to consumers that sometimes government cannot fund their own selves because it's not enough money for that. And the reason why they are funding it, it's because they know that it's a beneficial interaction. And basically what we see today in Europe, if you go to Europe, US or Australia, all the cars, or most of the cars being sold in the markets are 4 or 5-star cars. Those 4 or 5-star cars are beyond regulation, beyond basic governmental regulations, and in some cases earlier than regulation. But I'm talking about at least 8 years earlier than what regulation is expected to become in the market, just because of showing consumers the benefit of this technology and giving a better star rating, of course, for those cars performing better. I don't know if that answers your question. I think you have another bit in parallel, but I think that...
Yeah, I think maybe from the South African perspective, we have been engaging with the Department of Transport to accelerate and fast-track the implementations of the UN regulations. So that engagement and consultation is ongoing at this stage, yeah.
Right. Did you want to add on to what you wanted to say about your challenge to the manufacturers? Because I think we moved over that quite quickly. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to kind of add on to, before we get to any other questions, about manufacturers of taxis in South Africa and how they will respond to that. Yeah?
If there are any of those OEMs here, we're certainly challenging them because whether they take on the challenge or not, we are going ahead with it. But
okay.
If they are here, it would actually give us a bit of comfort in knowing that they are willing to crash test their vehicles because they've promised us over the years that they're actually safe.
Mm.
And now we want to challenge them. So
look, yeah.
And they want to take up the challenge, definitely make it much easier for us.
Yeah, I think, the point that we is making, South Africa in terms of its infrastructure and the public transport infrastructure gives us an idea in terms of who are the biggest people movers. And I think Alejandro, in a way, was referring to mass purchasers of vehicles. In this instance, it's actually individual people that buy a taxi for a mass transport system. So it definitely is one of those interesting challenges and things for one to say, is this system actually sustainable going into the future and see. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Are you covered, Mike? Okay, I'll get you in a second. Let's do you, Philip. Let's start with Philip in the background.
Hi, Philip Hull from the Road Safety Foundation. Listening to you here, I guess there are 2 issues on the vehicles. One is the build quality. It differs from different sources. I guess that's a manufacturer's responsibility to get that sorted out. The other one is the extras. I go cold when I hear of 2-point safety belts. We've seen so many spinal dislocations with people wearing a 2-point safety belt. It's almost a worthless type of operation. So I guess it comes down to economics. The cost of the vehicle in South Africa. Obviously the safety features, they're reducing in our market. I think we all accept that. And I just wonder if there's not an opportunity here perhaps to approach government or to motivate the government that on the cost of the cars, we're taxed heavily on the cars, but if we could separate the safety features that would allow 3-point belts, extra airbags, whatever, to be added in and not be taxed, that differential in tax paid on the vehicle perhaps might allow us to put a lot of those safety features into those cars. So I'm just wondering if that's not perhaps an opportunity that we've missed, and perhaps an opportunity we can look at for the future.
Very excellent question. And actually, you're helping to collect some bits I forgot during my presentation, which I didn't want to extend it for too long. When you take a look at what happened in Europe, US, and Australia, NCAP actually was one way to encourage manufacturers to get these features earlier and voluntarily in the markets. Yeah? Because what we test is a standard version. So that's point one. But other governments, they took the decision to encourage that from the taxation perspective, or taxes or fiscal incentives. So what usually happened in Europe, and this is more or less how the system works, they set a date as from which that point, this feature or this regulatory requirement will be mandatory. From now until that point in time, anyone that does it, anyone that has it on board, there will be a tax reduction or a fiscal incentive. Usually they do it in such a way that is significant enough for the manufacturers to do that, because they can offer the same car, the same model, with a feature at the same price. And that's actually the tempting. And this is actually what made the market in Europe move much quicker. Denmark is a good example with the ESC. In one point in time, they said, we are going to offer certain reduction in taxes for cars with ESC. And as from that point in time, a voluntary decision of the manufacturers, after 6 months, all new cars had ESC. So you get a voluntary decision. You don't have a political friction between the government and the manufacturers. And it's a way to make it voluntary. It's encouraging voluntary decisions. It's the same thing we do with the star rating. It's a different way to encourage that. But if you put those systems all together, they 100% work. 100%.
Work together.
May I suggest that the AA take the role in that?
You can suggest anything you like, Philip.
Yeah, look, I think maybe just to paraphrase the point, Philip, and I was sort of mulling the point on my side. I think the important thing, though, is from a South Africa perspective, it's something that we would want to drive, but it's also something that we can't drive alone, because most of the vehicles that come through to the South African market actually goes to the whole of SADC, which means it requires much more cooperation. I know there's one of my colleagues from Botswana that's in here as well. And it requires almost an intergovernmental conversation to make sure that at least one can be able to raise it. But it's something that we will take on our side, yeah.
Yeah, good point. Right, Michael? Sorry, we'll get to you in a second, yeah?
Morning, Michael from ENCA. Alejandro, are you able to disclose or tell us what the reaction was of the Nissan representative to the 0-star rating? Are you able to disclose that? And secondly, last year the Chery QQ3 was also a 0-star vehicle. Should we, according to what GlobalNCAP says, how the markets shift, we should logically be able to see a decline then in the sale of that model, since it's about a year on. Should we logically be seeing a decrease in the sale of Chery QQ3s, and if we're back here in a year, a decrease in Nissan NP300s?
Very good questions. I will start by the second. Yes and no. This is what we expect. But the problem is that when consumers are confronted to choose a car, most of the time led by price, and they don't have any other option on that price range, or a little bit higher, that will make it affordable to have a similar car with better safety, that probably is available in the market, but hasn't been tested. I want to clarify that. Then probably people will keep buying that car. Probably the sales volume will not increase as the manufacturer was expecting, probably. And it's reasonable to expect that it will decline. But you can see 100% that kind of reaction when you have the whole market tested. When you have all the cars available tested, or the most popular models tested, then it's reasonable to expect this kind of, and there's more awareness, of course, from the club, from the media, from the government. There's more awareness or raising awareness in consumers. Then it's reasonable to expect that. But we are testing only a few cars of the market, which is not what we expect. We would like to have all the cars tested, but the budget is limited. So just to summarize, it's reasonable to expect a decrease in sales because of that. But if there is a decrease in sales, it doesn't mean that it's only because of the safety. There are other aspects. And as I said, there are no competitors in that segment that are offering something different. That would probably, in that scenario, when you have two competitors and very similar conditions and consumers go for the other one, then you can say main reason is safety. But in this case, it's limited, the kind of information. That's why we are encouraging and trying to push for more cars to be tested. Regarding the comment on Nissan, the one-to-one meetings or what we say and discuss there, unless the manufacturer tells us that we can unveil it publicly, we don't. It's a confidential discussion. However, I think there is someone from Nissan in the room, or there were earlier today. If they're willing to speak, that's a good opportunity.
Okay. Maybe just to take on your earlier point, that's one of the reasons why, from the AA's perspective, we're proposing that there should actually be stickers that show the vehicle, what safety rating it has. Because if you don't have it, the consumer walks in there. I mean, there's very few people, or not a significant number of people, have access to the media information about those vehicles. Or at the time when I make a decision to buy the vehicle, that information is not top of mind because it's not displayed on the vehicle as to their safety rating. And that's why we're pushing quite extensively to make sure that that rating is actually displayed on the vehicle so that you are conscious when you make the decision.
At point of sale.
I wanted to add one more thing. If you take an example of what happens in Latin America, Brazil mainly, there's a lot of resistance. There was a lot of resistance from the media. Manufacturers blocking the information, and still though, with social media, information is there, and it caused the market to change. So nowadays, what we could read from the markets in Brazil, for example, is that people are not willing to buy a car which is less than 3 stars. That looks like, because manufacturers, the best-selling cars, for example, the best-selling car we tested in Brazil, the Onix, Chevy Onix, was a 0 stars. And in one point in time, being number 1 in sales, they still though decided to make it a 3-star. There's some reason for that. I don't know why, but they decided to do so. Ford Ka is number 3, the same thing. And the Kwid was number 2 for 3-4 months in a row. And that's another reason. So they kind of set up a certain standard from their reading that 3 stars is acceptable for the consumers there. And there's no rule written on that. No one said that has to be in that way. But if you have more cars tested, more cars assessed, then the market will shift much quicker.
All right. Okay. Over here in front. Just wait for the mic. Just introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Liam from My Broadband. I just wanted to ask, do you have any advice on what questions consumers should ask when they're going to buy a vehicle to ensure that they are getting something that is safe for them? And also based on results that you have so far, do you know what vehicles are basically so far the best to go for, or what are the worst to go for at this point? Obviously, from these results, I can tell that the Nissan is probably one of the worst to look at. But do you have any advice on basically what is something good to look at?
A good question. As from the NCAP, it's at this stage, and having been testing these cars in South Africa and our experience, the only thing we can say is if it's not rated in a certain level of stars, basically in this market, it's hard to trust what the manufacturer has to claim. One example is that if you go to the Nissan NP300, they sell the safety shield, the concept of the safety shield on that car, which is airbag, ABS, and engine immobilizer or blocking. And clearly, we think it's misleading at that point. Also, the hard body reference, we understand also it's a might be misleading. I think this, once again, it's from what we have seen here, and not just here, we have tested cars, very expensive cars made in the US, performing 2 stars only, with 7 airbags and ESC. So once again, it's from our perspective, we need to stick conservative and say, if it's not star rated, then that's a 0.1 demand or ask for star ratings to trust actually what is in the car. And whatever, if it's in the car, if it performs accordingly. And the other thing is that we tested cars that look the same from the European versions or US versions, and they do not offer the same safety levels, not just by features, just by performance. And if you don't test it, you don't know how it's going to work. So that's actually, once again, the call for the manufacturers to call on the transparency line, show by star rating what's happening in the cars.
All right, I'm going to start wrapping this up very shortly. Before we do, you've got a question over there, sir? Yes.
I'm just from Isuzu South Africa. I just want to ask you, single cab LDV testing?
Good question. Are you from a manufacturer?
Everybody had a question. It was about single cab LDV testing.
Good question. when manufacturers approach us asking that, we don't know if it's because they are just making a checkbox whether if they have to produce the next single cab with or without the airbags. I hope it's not the case. But I mean, from the consumer perspective, we do test all cars. We would like to test all cars in the market. We give preference to those cars which are double cabs because those are the ones used for family or more passenger purpose. Yeah, in our experience, when we want to release a result, for example, let's say, I think your question is directly to a pickup version more.
And more local.
Yeah. In this kind of range, we basically say it in this way. If the car is conceived as a commercial N1 vehicle, which in the case of a pickup, it's basically a chassis version without a box in the rear, then that car we probably, it's not in our scope. What cars are in our scope, it's M1 vehicles, yeah, which is M1 type of vehicles. Single cab can be M1s. Actually, they're based in M1 versions, so they're capable. Actually, we can pick them and test them as well.
All right. I'm going to take one more question from Roy. There is lunch being served afterwards. I'll take your question as well. So there is lunch being served afterwards. So when we are done here, I'm sure Alejandro and Collins will both be available if you wanted to pick their brains any further. So I'll take the two last questions over there. Wendy, I think you can speak afterwards. Roy?
This is a question for Mr. Khumalo. You mentioned about having mandatory stickers on the vehicles. But surely you should be pushing for mandatory testing because you can't, if only some vehicles have stickers, then there's no point in it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. We definitely are supportive. I think what we're saying is at some point, and obviously the pressure comes from different angles. So if, for example, I have a vehicle that has been tested and I'm proud to put my sticker onto the vehicle, then it pushes pressures on the other manufacturers to be able to volunteer their vehicles so that we can then test them and make sure that at least everyone else is given a fair opportunity. But definitely mandatory testing is something that we'll push for. I think the funding is the biggest challenge that we're facing at this stage. Yeah.
And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, Roy.
Yeah.
Leighton, I just want to add one more thing. At least from my side, when I refer to mandatory labeling, it's probably in digital era, it's not the right way to say it. But until now, it's actually more I'm referring to a sticker which says how many star ratings got in an NCAP. That's the point. Probably digitally speaking, it would be a QR stick in the car, and you have just put your cell phone. It will tell you how many star ratings. I don't know how it's going to look in the future, but from our perspective, in many NCAPs, we're using apps, free apps for cell phones, and you can just look at the car there. You don't need to go with the car and take a look at the sticker. So the point is that the car to be assessed and rated by the local star rating. That's the message from our side, the mandatory request on that. In the case of the US, in the Maroni label, at the beginning there were some cars that were not assessed with a star rating. And the cars that were assessed, they had a star rating, and those not assessed, they said not tested. And that caused a very incredible reaction from consumers. People will not buy a car that is said not tested. So that caused immediate reaction. It took a few years, but all the cars were later on well tested.
Okay, I think you covered.
If I could, sorry, my name is Sandy. I'm from Sobrala. I think when Collins, opened up the meeting, he indicated that government has very big priorities. Whilst it's in their interest as well, I think one of their agencies, RTMC, is solely responsible for, road safety. But I think just in terms of funding, we have to take up that responsibility, both as media, as consumers, the various associations as well, to lobby and put pressure on manufacturers. I still believe that they have that responsibility because, safety is very key. The lady was talking, for instance, the likes of the various, Toyota, for instance, that move a huge amount of, commuters. I think that, to me, the way I read it, I think it just calls for us to take up that responsibility and be the pressure group, basically, in our various corners and lobby for these manufacturers to spend hugely. I know that they do talk about crash testing, and I'm not too sure the crash testing that they conduct in their facilities, if it's anything compared to what you highlighted over here.
A good question. When I was presenting, I referred to regulation and NCAP. NCAPs are usually, we are crash testing a little bit different, at higher speed, not very much, 8 kilometers an hour faster, it's not that much. And most manufacturers, they do have NCAP, internal NCAP testing, because they want to assess how the car is going to perform. It's reasonable. Most manufacturers do that. Before, even when we pick the car and they haven't tested it before according to NCAP, they pick a car and do their own assessment just to monitor what to expect in the official test. But always when we are doing this kind of consumer testing programs, we do it based in one key thing. It's an independent facility. Independent stuff. So it's not data or from the manufacturer, because manufacturers always can tell you, okay, it never happened to us. That's typical reaction. Or we're surprised. That can be the case. Or sometimes they talk about, we did 10 tests, and in only one of them we had this kind of result. The other 9 were okay. Statistically okay, but the point is, if you have one car that failed, how many of these cars are on the road? And just exactly the car we picked was a matter of luck. The point is, someone can be seriously injured by that kind of failure or problem in the test, and that's what we highlight. Manufacturers do perform the test, and they do know what to expect in the tests. There's no surprise with them. There might be surprises sometimes where there is a production issue, but when the car is, let's say, performing as expected in our tests, there are no surprises for them. And most of them, they do test the car in advance, so they more or less know that. But once again, the rating has to come from an independent organization. It would be great if you can create an organization where you have the government, automobile clubs, consumers, NGOs, road safety NGOs sitting on the board. Latin America, as an example, we have 5 seats in the board of Latin NCAP. And it's 1 for the automobile clubs, 1 seat for the NGOs related to road safety, 1 seat for the insurance companies, 1 seat is open for governments. So all the actors are sitting in that table. And it's the way that society, it's composed. And it's incredibly, Euro NCAP is using the same kind of configuration. And it's an open and transparent way to make this forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna literally take 3 more, and then we are closing it down. The gentleman in the back, Tandia, will come to you, and Rafil will come to you as well. The gentleman in the back with the microphone. Yes, sir.
Coffee from Lombard Insurance. I want to know who's collecting the data on accidents. Are we actually collecting what happens after an accident? If there's a head-on collision, we know that it was a Figo and there was a collapsed lung or something like that. Because I know, for example, in America, there was an instance where something like a steering column safety was improved just because they noted that there were punctures to, let's say, lungs with certain vehicles, for example. So is anyone collecting that data?
Yeah,
look,
that's a good question. I think in South Africa, the official data comes from the Road Traffic Management Corporation, and then I will hand over, having said that, I'll hand over immediately to Rafil in front here. Can you come with the mic in front here to Rafil? Just put your hand up there, Andy. To the Road Traffic Management Corporation, Rafil and Khalid, they actually collect and collate that data. So Rafil, maybe you can just highlight that for us. And then once Rafil is finished, we'll come to you, Tommy.
Thanks. I think I'll come to the data, but let's. Sandile asked a very important question about the role of the lead agency in South Africa on what we have seen today and what we do going forward. I think there is perhaps a need to be brutally frank and say, with all the challenges that we have in this country on road safety, the issue of vehicles has not received the necessary attention that it deserves. And this is perhaps a wake-up call to say that we can do quite a lot in this regard. Of course, we are guided by the contributory factors, which goes to your data. We know that over 90% of the problem is human behavior, followed by road factors, and vehicle factors are last. So sitting with this kind of situation, our priorities have always been on law enforcement, to deal with corrective behavior issues. We have not been focusing on vehicles as much as we should. Having said this, we still concede and are totally aligned to the same systems thinking framework, to say that it's all of these factors that are working together at the same time. So in order to ensure that this goes forward, you don't just need the RTMC in the room. You need the RTMC, you need the Department of Transport, you need the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications to lay out a plan that says by this time we would have achieved this and that. The issue of stickers for me is something that is low-hanging fruit and things that we can attain within the short term. Let's see what we can do, because every effort does count when you think about the 40 people that die daily. So that's to Sandile. The second question was regarding road traffic information. We are the people that publish your state of road safety reports. Our data is very good when it comes to the number of people that die on the roads. So if you look at the World Health Organization estimates and you look at our estimates, we are the best in Africa in terms of publishing that data. However, we are very lacking on the issue of injuries. And that's another phase where we should try to get as much data as we can. Because we can't sit here with authority and say how many people are injured on our roads. That is always a matter of extrapolations and so on. But that's an area that we are looking into. Thanks.
All right, I think you can take it up afterwards with Ruffiel. I'm going to close off the questions now. As I said to you earlier.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I add one extra bit, or one point? When we mention about mandatory labeling, it's not just overnight, all cars must have it. That would be great. But why not trying kind of an incentive process? That is say, okay, from now until 2 years, all cars must be star rated. In the meantime, whoever that has a star rating can be benefited with the taxes or whatever, or something like that. Incentive strategies are much more positive than any other. And they can create an incredible fast change, voluntary, without any political cost or friction, which usually takes a lot of energy and human resources from governments, and also takes a lot of energy out of the system itself. So voluntary decisions with encouragement, that's probably the most productive way so we can do it as a society. This is not a responsibility just by the government or just by the NCAP, just the AA. It's a responsibility of the society, all of you. Automobile clubs, governments, consumers, NGOs, road safety, car manufacturers as well. So it's a system. It's all of us working together.
Good point. All right. Thandi, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Khumalo, and your guest and the chairperson, the program director. My name is Thandi Moya. I am from the Department of Transport. Refilwe, the lady who just spoke, is from RTMC. RTMC is an agency of the Department of Transport, just to put it in perspective. I liked the point that Bab Sandile from Savrala made about explicitly outlining the fact that government alone will not be able to carry the burden. We have all the various factors, Bab Khumalo, at play that constraining us, budgetary-wise and otherwise, such that we will not be able to have the muscle, but not that the spirit is not willing. We are willing. And to further show that we are interested, we are wanting to make this change, we are here. And we work with AA every step of the way as far as this program is concerned. And it would be unjustifiable for me not to support firmly the statement that he made, Sandile from Savrala, that there is here a fundamental role which private must play. And if we can work together, I like the decade of action ethos, you know, the the slogan that they go with, working together, we can save millions of lives. So there is willingness from the side of government, and to see the private sector doing these kind of things, it appeases us, because we realize, as Refilio said earlier, we are almost lacking on that pillar of vehicle. And we do need to work together with the private to push that agenda of safe cars on our roads. The last part I want to comment on, again, which was said by Savrala, is the crash that he referred to. Yes, there is some form of crash that we do, but it's more on simulation of crashes, simulation of accidents, to determine the impact of the accident, of the crash, when a car is moving at what kilometers per hour and all that, and to demonstrate what speed can do. So it's not so much the same, Babsandile, as the one of NCAP, that particular crash. But I see an angle, speaking from the department, from the standpoint of being in the department, I see an angle where we can even work closer together in expanding this and be able to circumvent the issues of resources. I'm not promising, I just don't want to be misinterpreted to be saying we will fund, but I'm saying there is an area, and through that area, the accident simulation, I see that this can be done. And it's something, Bab Kumalo, that can be done because we do support the NCAP. In fact, we speak about the NCAP even in our road safety strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tandi. Collins, you want to say anything? You happy you're all covered? No. All right. Before I release you, some of you will have seen these. For those of you who are my age and older, these are what they call selfie boards. And so you take this and you stand with it. So Collins clearly knows what it is. You take this and you take a photograph of yourself and you post it to your social media. And I would really urge you, please, to do that and use the hashtag Safer Cars for Africa, as you see here behind you. Please do that. Please, before you leave. I think it's not only a good way of just recognizing that you were here today, but it's also your way of just supporting the fact that you support safer cars in Africa. So please take these selfie boards and take photographs of yourself, and you can do that outside. Take them of groups as well. And if you want to take, whoever can get them, obviously. There is lunch being served outside, as I said. The results banners are outside if you want to take your selfies there. And the media flash drives with all the information, the videos, and everything are also outside. I really want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. It's really an important event for us. We certainly hope to see you again very soon, hopefully next year. Maybe you can bring your colleagues. We will very happily accommodate double the size of the people that we are. I'd like to say thank you very much to Collins, who really did give us a very good background of what was going on in the country and in Africa. Thank you, Collins. And then to Alejandro, thank you very much for coming through. I think everybody that was here certainly got a lot of benefit from what you had to say. Both of these gentlemen will be outside if you want to catch them afterwards. Thank you very much, and I'll close it on that note. Thank you.
But you find